This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Danger Slater about his new book, STARLET. Danger Slater is the Wonderland Award-winning author of I Will Rot Without You, Moonfellows, He Digs a Hole, Little Miss Apocalypse, Impossible James, and Puppet Skin. He lives in Portland, Oregon. He was, until recently, the world's most flammable writer. R.I.P. Carson Winter. You will be missed. Welcome to the show, Danger.
Thanks for having me. I like that Carson got a little shout out there.
Yeah.
He self-immolated, I guess.
You just look at that guy and you're like, that guy's flammable.
Yeah, I've been in a room with him and I know how much he drinks.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me if he was completely.
Just for whiskers and flannel alone, he has a high burn index. So, icebreaker question. What is the best flavor of Kit Kat?
Oh my God. I've had so many Kit Kats. I'm not going to say 100. I've had about 65 to 70 different flavors of Kit Kat. I'm a connoisseur and they're all pretty good. But my favorite, I think, was toasted wheat.
Ooh.
Which I think is Japanese for just cookie. The picture of it has like a cracker, like a Ritz looking cracker. Maybe I'm just a simpleton. I don't know. There's a lot of complicated flavors in the world. I've had like sake, ume flavored ones and all these crazy rum raisin, all these crazy Kit Kat flavors. But simple, classic, do it right. You can't miss.
I agree. I think the greatest test of a flavor, and the Japanese do this well, is subtlety.
Yeah.
Away from the world of Kit Kats, how would you describe your style or your approach?
Oh, just like absurdist, kind of dark humor, absurdism, horror, bizarro. I don't really like to think of genres or anything like that. I probably sound like a pretentious asshole. Like every writer's like, I don't write genre. Then it's like the most basic horror book you've ever read. But not that I don't write genre, but I like to kind of mix tones and that kind of thing. So I use kind of genres as jumping off points to just, I don't know, do something original, or at least feels original to me.
Okay, because my follow-up question is, what is it about surrealism or absurdity that you think heightens horror? Or is it not in service of horror? Is it in service of surprise and originality?
I mean, both. A lot of people associate absurdism with horror. They think goofiness when they think the absurd, but that's not really what the definition of the word means. This quote, and I'm probably not getting it exactly right, but it's like, man suffers and God laughs. Like, that is basically what absurdism is. It's a universe that doesn't adhere or answer your questions or your prayers or anything you need. So if you're all alone in the universe and trying to make sense of something, I can't think of anything more horrific than a universe that isn't built to provide answers to us, even though we search. So it kind of crosses into that cosmic horror territory too, with absurdism.
Absolutely, yeah. When you look at it that way, that's chilling.
Now, I use humor in my writing. I use a lot of humor, but I don't think of my stories as comedies, even though there's full of jokes. They're usually pretty depressing. Like thematically depressing, but I do like to be funny too.
Levity, so you can go harder on the characters, or darker with the tone, or is it just to throw in little stopgaps of release so you can go back to building tension?
I don't necessarily know the answer to that question. I'm just kind of writing what feels right at the time. So I don't really deconstruct my own approach in a lot of ways.
Unfortunately, I'm in the role of deconstructionist here. I'm getting an answer regardless, which is you have a sense of humor that cannot help but express itself when you're writing. Some things just seem darkly funny to you, or it seems right.
Well, there's something disarming about humor, about coming in, especially my style of humor, which is surrealist humor. I'm constantly asking readers to accept something that is impossible. All fiction is doing this, especially horror fiction. There is horror fiction that isn't based in kind of mythologies and killer Michael Myerses that can't be killed or whatever. But I'm constantly pushing this line where I'm like, if you accept this, then you're going to accept the next thing, or we'll take you to the next thing. And then we get to that next thing. Can we keep going further and further? And the kind of further we get away from reality, the more I feel like we get to the heart of a different truth, not the truth of the world, but the truth of the interior truth, because you're stripping away the things that you could use to build these walls around yourself. I always think of fiction as kind of like the truer truth.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like nonfiction, you watch a true crime show or something, and that is something that happened. And that is real, that's reality. But the truer truth, the way things feel and make you feel, is all interior. And it's not necessarily based on what the world is. That could get you there, but it doesn't have to be. You could create your own world and boundaries and build the playpen for someone to explore these other parts of themselves.
I'm really interested in surrealist horror because I guess I come out of the school of suspension of disbelief. You can only ask your audience to accept one impossible premise or one strange thing, and then it's up to you to nail down everything else in the world and the dialogue and characters so that it all feels so real that that one weird, otherworldly, or incredibly dangerous thing feels menacing and real because you accept the rest of the world as real. But to instead pull the rug out and start your character or your audience off with their feet in the clay, and they're constantly slipping around and sinking into deeper and deeper levels of unreality, it is a really effective way to create horror. And I'm very impressed in the people that do it.
I think what I'm getting at is a lot easier for people to understand in film. There's a lot of surrealist films that people watch and it resonates with them. And I feel like fiction or books don't do it as often, at least not a lot of these horror books. A lot of them do what you're saying, which is kind of give you one weird thing, one weird premise. Here's a killer that can't be killed. Here's the videotape that you watch that kills you in 7 days. Everything else is real.
Right.
But you watch a movie like, I mean, this isn't a horror movie, but you watch something like Sorry to Bother You, which like it starts weird and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. Like, right. But it is about real things,
right?
On top of that,
yeah.
So it's the medicine go down, I guess.
I think the one step up that film might have over literature is that you can see it. So if they get into a car, even if absurd things are happening and people turning into horses or whatever, it's like, okay, that's a car and they can see it and touch it and there's gravity, and like so much of that just bypasses your brain via the optic nerve. You are accepting all this reality around the crazy stuff. Whereas in fiction, you are the one laying out literally everything. You are building the floor underneath the characters as they walk and the readers as they move their eyes across the page. I think unless you get into like a Nicholas Refn movie where it's just fields of deep strobing red and purple. Okay, we've stripped out all other base reality. Every milestone, every point of reference you have, it's a freak out. It's a psychedelic freak out.
Yeah. I think the thing that makes it different than a like dream logic, right? So you have dream logic where there's not necessarily causality between things. Things are symbolic and they happen in ways that mean things symbolically and not literally. Surrealism does that too, but I think a lot of, what I do with my writing and a lot of surrealist films and stuff, they have an internal logic that they adhere to. So even though you're taking steps further away from reality, it never, if it's done right, it never breaks out of that snow globe that you've put it in, because you're presenting the world. And as long as you don't break the world, people will get on board with it. At least the people who like what I'm doing. There's plenty who don't.
So we're going to talk about Starlet today. Can you read us a back of the book summary?
When an aspiring young actress accepts an invite to a A-lister's home, she soon learns the terrifying secrets of the Hollywood elite. That was actually my pitch.
Nice.
Also, that was like my elevator pitch. And then we're right in the back copy. Ex Booth, who runs Schoolish Books, asked me what I wanted on there. I said, just put the pitch on. And they said, yeah, let's do it.
I thought that you started the book with a really interesting perspective of this omniscient narrator speaking directly to the audience and then zooming deeper and deeper in until you were inside the main character's head. And that felt very cinematic to me. When you were writing the story about an actress who's coming to Hollywood and seeking fame, were you playing with these conventions? Were you thinking about camera moves? What were some of your touchstones for Starlet?
It's easy to just jump into the book. Oh, she's on a bus or wherever she's going, and that's where you start. But I wanted to give it a little bit of like, we are the audience watching the thing. There's a piece of me that, and this kind of recurs in all my books, that like don't necessarily think that the reader needs to be separate from the story itself. Like, it's okay to talk directly to your reader and change perspectives like that because they're reading a book. It's not like they're not doing that. So this sounds crazy. There's no reason to pretend like we're not doing something that I can't explain myself. I don't even know why I'm trying to explain myself. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
There's this technique of narrative distance, and I'm so interested in how people manipulate that. Obviously, you are holding a bound stack of paper and looking at little ink marks, but at a certain point, you hallucinate images based on the words. And if you're really immersed, you can even lose yourself in the characters. So there's this weird thing that reading does, and you hear voices in your head and all sorts of stuff, but you can also nudge people and be like, hey, turn the page. And that's such a crazy thing you can do with writing. It's much more ham-fisted with film and television, where like someone comes up and they knock on the screen or something, or they're like, don't you turn that dial? And it's like, okay, yeah. I'm sitting on the couch. Yes, I'm watching you. I find it playful and so ripe for experiment in books. I would like to use it more, and I just call it out when I see it because it's like a shiny toy. I'm so fascinated by it.
This is kind of going back to the genre thing we were talking about a little earlier, but I approach almost like I'm telling a fairy tale. That's kind of how I think of them in my heads. So fairy tales adhere to their own logic and stuff like that because they're morality tales. They have a purpose they're trying to express, and they are presented in a storybook fashion. Classically start with once upon a time. I'm approaching my writing like a fairy tale. I'm not necessarily saying once upon a time, but I'm going, here, sit down. I'm going to tell you a story. Reminding your reader, they were your kid laying in bed, you're telling them the story, reminding them that they are reading a book, I don't think is necessarily going to ruin the immersion. If you're doing it right. It is more like we are having fun here, and you are allowed to accept these leaps of logic because we are doing a story. I am telling you something that is not true.
But I think it sets an expectation early on that gives you license to go much further afield and much weirder because you already know what ride you're getting on. Whereas, for instance, if you started with something that was really dry and clinical, that was like an FBI case file, and then you went really weird with it, you're like, whoa, like that came out of left field because I thought this was a procedural, a cut and dried. I thought this was a found footage style almost storytelling.
The first few pages of a book is the tone setting of the entire book. And I know that when I'm working on something, I don't necessarily know how it's going to read. I don't know what the voice of the entire piece is going to be until I really nail down those first few pages or that first chapter. I will rewrite that first one many, many times. I'll do it over and over again because I have to understand the voice. It isn't always the same. I've heard people say, oh, my writing is very distinct and they can always tell that I've written something, but I don't think the books have the same approach or tone to them necessarily. They might have my voice to them, but they don't all follow the same pattern.
Are you more of a plotter, more of a pantser?
It's changed over the years, but right now I will plot my entire book using note cards, like hundreds of them, and I will plot out the entire thing. I'll spend about 2 or 3 weeks doing that before I start writing. I basically write novellas, 150 to 200 page books, simply because of my style and the things I'm asking of an audience. You really can only take them so far. And if you're getting into things that are double the length, it's like, where do we go from here? Into surrealism, like how do we keep going, like without it being redundant or boring or anything?
You've heightened it to such an extent to make it absurd. You don't want to exhaust the audience.
Starlight is a little more traditionally plotted, I would say, 3-act structure, but I like to try to start as close to that beginning of that second act as possible. I'm like, let's get into the actual book. Setups, everyone knows. Everyone's seen or read books or seen movies. It's like you could get that sense of character through action, stuff like that, instead of giving those moments where they're just sitting around. Let me talk to my sister and explain why I need to get my kids back. I'm just thinking of, whatever the book's about, like.
I don't know if this comes out of prestige television or something. I don't know where this wrecking ball came in, because back in the day, it used to be start in the ordinary world, give us the status quo, and then throw in a complication or flip the character's world upside down. Once we know who they are, what they want, what they're afraid of, what they think they want, and then take them on this journey. Nowadays, everything I watch or read starts with every character has a gun in their mouth. And I'm like, whoa, like, where do we go from here? How much arc, how much swing can there be if you start with someone who's like devastated, grief racked? I mean, obviously, this is a lot of horror stuff, but it's wild to me how we have truncated that first part. And we're starting with someone at their lowest point, and then we're going to try to take them lower. That's something I've noticed in horror that is fascinating and somewhat confounding to me, because when it works beautifully.
It's funny because I'm like acting like I have some sort of authority or know what I'm talking about here. And everything I say, I've also done the exact opposite in things too.
Right.
So I'll be like, yeah, it starts the second act, which like, sure, that worked for one story, but then there's another story where I'm like, no, that first act is like half the book, because I need to set all this up to kind of get the rest of the things going. Whatever the project is, it's so focused on that it's hard to give any real aphorism that makes sense.
I think there are certain stories that require a lot of setup, and there are other stories or subgenres like grief horror where it's about grief. We can start off with the person grieving, and we'll tell you what they're grieving later. But all you need to know is that the main mood, the main crayon here is grief. And we're going to explore that. You don't need that whole first act of in the park having a picnic with their kids, and then you see the Mack truck glinting on the horizon.
I think Starlet's got a really long first act. What the book is doing is getting her to this celebrity's house where she's going to have to go through these trials. I don't want to give too much away, but things go sideways.
How much can you tell us about your main character and how she comes into the story?
Yeah, okay. So she is in her early 20s. She is from Wisconsin, a fact that kind of hangs on her. And everyone else in Hollywood doesn't quite understand it. There's a city in Wisconsin that it has a very French name, and everyone in Hollywood keeps mistaking it for somewhere in France because no one knows anything about Wisconsin. But she moves to LA to become an actress, and things aren't going well, because this is the story of anyone in the arts at any time. We all have big dreams, and it's hard to get where we want to go with them. Even if we meet someone like she does, she meets this guy, Brandon Bowers, who is a very pointedly Army Hammer type. She meets this guy who seems to be opening the doors for her. And even when the doors open and you walk through, it might not be what you want or expect.
You said you were from New Jersey earlier.
Yeah.
And now you live in Portland?
Yeah.
So much of this story has all these great details about California, Los Angeles, Hollywood, the Hollywood Hills, celebrity parties, things like that. Did you live in LA for a time?
I've visited several times, but
okay.
I've never lived there. A lot of the details, especially in that early part of the book, before we get to the mansion, when we're talking about the city itself, I got from a friend of mine who lives there.
Okay.
I was like, I want to have a scene at this pizza place. Can you tell me a cool pizza place? Can you describe it to me? They gave me all this information, so much information about this one pizza place that they love. They're talking about the salt shakers. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? But then when I sat down to write it, I used all of it. I used almost everything they told me.
It's great. I lived in LA for 28 years. I was like, does Danger live in LA? Because all the stuff is spot on. I can see it. I recognize the locations. The distances are accurate, the traffic, everything about it, even the landscape and the atmosphere up in the hills versus the valley and stuff like that, really spot on and made me a little homesick.
Because she goes up and down a couple roads in the book. And I actually went on Google Street View and took the journey myself to see how long it took, how many miles it was, what it actually looked like from the car window or where you might be sitting on a porch in one of these houses. And there's actually a trajectory to the story where she starts in the valley, goes up the hill, and then back down the other side where the Walk of Fame and, the Chinese Theater and all the famous Hollywood landmarks, what we associate with Hollywood, on the other side of the mountain. So she is quite literally climbing the mountain to get to the other side.
Yeah, really cool. Much appreciated. Man, that Google Street View is like the greatest tool for a writer.
I don't set stories in real places a lot of times. I have kind of this vague idea of a city that I use in a lot of my writing where I'll just call it the city. And it's an amalgamation of a lot of the places I live, Portland and Jersey and New York City and that kind of stuff. But this is a very specific story about a very specific place. So I really got into the geography of it.
You bring in a few other characters. It's not just your main girl, Deja, and the alluring Brandon Bowers. You have another actress sort of as a foil, and then you bring in a pop artist.
Yeah.
It's a story about Hollywood. Why are you sideswiping the pop artist as you're lampooning the actors?
Well, specifically Andy Warhol is getting sideswiped here. You know what? Because and I don't want to deride pop art or anything. I like the way it looks. But I think by design, it is supposed to be kind of superficial and highlight how superficial it is. Like, here is Marilyn Monroe 4 times in just different colors. What is this telling us about her? It doesn't tell us anything. There's a kind of nice aesthetic appeal to it that doesn't really have a lot of meat to it. And that's what I was doing with that character. He talks about his different ideas that he has for art, and they're all really stupid. I just think it's kind of part and parcel to the concept of celebrity, is like, here's a person who uses celebrity as an artistic statement.
Was this story rattling around in your mind before the Army Hammer controversy, or did you read that and you're like, that's a story?
Yeah, that was the jump off point for me. The Army Hammer thing, if you don't know, the listeners, the Army Hammer, the actor, has some kind of weird fetishes, let's say, that he was indulging in on Instagram with some young ladies, specifically cannibalistic fetish stuff. It's super weird. He's a super weird guy.
He had some extremely violent fantasies, and they involved torture and necrophilia and cannibalism.
I looked at that, and I looked at the kind of guy that he looks like, which is this classically handsome, like, nobody can hurt me, I'm the king of the world type of look. And he comes from a very powerful family. And I'm like, there's something underneath this. This isn't just I've had too much sex in my life, I need to get weird now. There's something else here.
There's a darkness there.
Yeah.
Your main character comes from Wisconsin. Were you just playing with the trope, or were you playing with this clash of middle America or flyover states? They have all these conspiracy theories about Hollywood elites, how they get on top, what they have to do in order to earn their place, how they stay there, how they control people. How much of that was mixed in with the Army Hammer piece?
Spot on. That is that idea of like, we are living in 2 separate worlds. I know it's one country, but it's actually a bunch of little countries that is sort of connected. And California is its own thing. And to a lot of people, I don't want to make generalities, but there's a lot of people who don't quite get that culture. And our character comes out of a place like that. I don't mean Wisconsin. I mean her family in particular. They're not like these Hollywood elites are eating babies, but they are like, you don't know what this place is. It's not good. You want to go there. And if you do, bad things will happen to you, which is exactly what happens in the book.
Is that filling the role of the Harbinger in a slasher film who's like, it's got a death curse, and you ignore it and you move on at your own peril, you've crossed a threshold. That's your first mistake, is you've ignored the advice. You go into the lion's den, and then at a certain point, horror is based on the choices you've made. These are the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a religious mother. She's not a super big part of the book. We only meet her maybe once or twice for a line or two in flashbacks, but, her presence weighs on the character. And then she also has a friend at the strip mall she works at. And the friend also is doing the same kind of thing. Your mom is going to worry about you and tell you what to do and tell you what you should and shouldn't do. And your friend is going to also worry about you, but you have a lot more leeway to express yourself to them. She's like, I know you want this, so maybe you should go for it. But if you do notice red flags, you should possibly pump the brakes. Deja is confronted with red flags almost immediately after meeting this guy, though, and completely ignores them. I read a review the other day. Yeah. There's been a few coming in, like early reviews, and the person who reviewed it, they're like, no woman would ignore these red flags. They're like, this is obviously written by a man. I'm like, no man would ignore these red flags. Like, it's crazy. That's the whole point. The thing she wants, she is so focused on that she's not ignoring the red flag. She's just going for it anyway.
What I like about her friend Val is that Val is a local, doesn't have any of that religious morality or homespun wisdom. She's not an actress, but she knows how the town works, and she's very practical. She's not saying, don't go there, don't get involved. She's saying, know what you're signing up for. Go in with your eyes open and be realistic and understand that there are consequences to these choices if you're going to go after what you want at any cost. That's one step further down the rabbit hole than the mom back in Wisconsin, who's just trying to shut it down for all these other lofty reasons. To have Deja continue anyway, thinking that she's going after what she wants and that she's justifying the means to get to this end. Everyone's doing it. I guess I have to do it too. I'll play the game. And she's so unprepared for what she's about to walk into.
Yeah, now that we're talking about it, there's like a third Harbinger too. The paparazzi character. He's posted up outside Brandon's mansion trying to get pictures that he could sell to the gossip blogs and stuff. And he kind of also gives her a warning, but he's more like, you should get some pictures in there that you can sell to me because you could be kind of close to these people, but also view them. He's on the other side of the bars, like you would view dangerous animals in a zoo. Like, he's like, on this side, it's safe. Once you go in there, it's a whole other ball game.
Now I want to write someone with a bunch of Harbingers in it.
It's just that. It's
Harbingers all the way down.
Nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
Just people getting warned and ignoring it.
No, at the end, the main character becomes another Harbinger. And so it's just this endless procession. It's almost like that thing.
Pretty good.
It is pretty good. It's almost like that thing where you put a curse on someone and you let them know, and then they destroy themselves with fear and paranoia. If you had to like walk into this ever creepier estate and mansion and down into the basement, and then you find a cave, and then there's a tunnel, and all these Harbingers are like, it's bad down there, I'm telling you. And people would literally have heart attacks because they get so wound up by a certain point, or they'd go crazy and become the next Harbinger. Good times.
That's a good ending, though. You think about like the cosmic terror. You go, whoa, what the hell made this weirdo?
Right.
You know, the type of weirdo that sits outside of caves and tells people not to go in them. Becoming that person is its own kind of terror.
It's its own horror.
Yeah.
And it's revelatory because you understand the horror, and you are also doomed to bring someone into an even deeper crux of despair because you're going to harbinge them. That re-harbingers.
It sounds almost like a Dante's Inferno type punishment.
Yeah.
Your eternity will be spent just sitting outside the gates and telling people not to go in.
And the Sisyphean nature of it is, you know that they're going to go because you were that person before.
Yeah.
Before your mind broke under the strain. I mean, you could even do it, and this might be too weird, if they are literally the same person. And it's not until like, you know, all their bones are broken and their teeth fall out from crawling through this tunnel that they realize the reason why all those people look familiar is because they are incredibly insane, degraded versions of themselves. And they keep going on this journey. That sounds almost like a weird drug trip.
Yeah.
Meeting versions of yourself, they're telling you it's gross down there. It's dark. You don't want to face those things. Shit.
I love it.
I'm spinning. We got to get back to the book.
I love it.
Coming 2025, Harbingers from Danger Slater. So let's see. So she's gone past the third Harbinger.
It sounds silly when you say it that way.
Sorry.
They have other. They serve other.
There's other
purposes.
stuff in the book, guys.
They're not just there to warn her. They are.
Yes.
They are characters that are.
They are symptoms of this system of degradation and oppression who are incredibly real. That you can drive up any LA street and you will meet people just like this. I used to live next to a paparazzo when I lived in Venice. They're out there.
Well, like, is it safer to be a parasite than to kind of be the host? You know, like that is because she wants to be on top. She wants to be the one. But this guy's like, oh yeah, people call me a sycophant, but like I'm out here, I make my money. Like I have my kids in school and stuff, or you know, he's got his own thing going on. There's a part of me that when I was writing this book, exploring those two thoughts, a thought of like, I have earned this and this is my reward, is all this adulation and I need to keep this by any means necessary. Mm-hmm. And then there's another part that's like, I haven't gotten what I deserve yet and I need to somehow get it by any means necessary. The hunger is kind of there for both sides, even though Deja is the hero of this story. Her ambition is kind of her fatal flaw. Yeah, you know, her hubris or whatever is her ambition. You know, and it's the same for the people who are taking advantage of her in the book too. Their ambition is their fatal flaw as well.
She's definitely the protagonist. I don't know if I'd call her a hero. I understand her motivations, but I don't necessarily agree with what she's willing to do to get it. Maybe I just don't have that burning monomaniacal obsession that she has, but she didn't have to go up into that mansion.
I think of myself as an artist. Like, we talked about this right at the top, that I've been writing since 2010. I've been doing it a long time. And there's a part of me that's like, I should have broken through and been famous by now. What the hell's going on? You know? And then there's a part of me that's like kind of bitter that hasn't happened. And there's a part of me that's like, nah, man, like this is it. You're on the ride. Show up, do whatever you need to do to kind of keep pushing the ball forward. So I'm not like these characters, but I wanted to explore that feeling of what ambition feels like to me as a writer. Mm-hmm. The characters aren't writers, so I'm not talking about writing, but the struggle is the same.
Right. And I think Hollywood is probably the most concentrated, vicious form of that struggle.
Yeah, well, it plays out publicly for everybody to see.
You have a shelf life as an actress that does not apply to writers necessarily. So the story doesn't start when Brandon Bowers is at the peak. It almost catches him on a little bit of a wobble. He's coasting and he's trying to reinvent himself and stay relevant, but he is on the precipice of losing what he has. Tigers are always the most dangerous at their end, I believe Alan Quatermain said in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I have to work into every show contractually. So Brandon Bowers is not just like hungry, obsessive, maniacal, ruthless, Machiavellian. His back is against the wall because between every chapter you have a review of one of his movies and they start out glowing, and as the book goes on, the reviewers and the critics are starting to see the shine come off of Brandon Bowers. And that's the brass ring that your main character Deja is trying to grab.
I was talking earlier about Deja physically going up the hill and coming down the other side. I was thinking in terms of the reviews of his movies kind of doing the opposite to him on the more metaphorical side, pushing him back up the hill. Mm-hmm. You know, he was there in the promised land and people get his shtick. He starts trying to, like you said, trying to reinvent himself, and it's just not working because maybe he didn't have the range that they thought he did. Maybe he was just a pretty face. Maybe he just picked the wrong projects, or he got comfortable. And as he gets more desperate, the movies get stupider. The prestige dramas at the beginning, and at the end, it's like right to streaming garbage schlock action movies, like something freaking Jean-Claude Van Damme would make today kind of deal. That's kind of his whole backstory is kind of played out in those chapter headings.
Brandon Bowers and his Hollywood cohorts have a secret for how they stay so vital. Part of that has to do with everyone's favorite conspiracy substance, adrenochrome. How far down the rabbit hole did you go? Did you just open Twitter and you're like, oh, that's all the crazy conspiracy shit I need? Or did you look into it? Did you see what people actually believe about this?
I didn't go too deep into it because the book isn't one for one following that QAnon conspiracy kind of thing that Tom Hanks eats baby livers or whatever the fuck. Like that's not exactly what's happening here. But during COVID, that was when that was taking root, this new conspiracy, the QAnon conspiracy, that there's this grand plan and everybody's in on it except for us brave few who can see the truth.
True Americans, yeah.
Yeah. There are some Reddit accounts, not based off of their conspiracies, but I was reading the ones about family members talking about their dad who they lost to this conspiracy, or their grandpa or their mom or their wife. I was seeing this desperate, I don't understand how my partner believes A, B, and C thing. And I was just so fascinated by this. How do we get there? And the book isn't exploring that, because the book is positing these people are actually right to a degree. But I did look into that QAnon stuff as kind of my jumping off point.
It occurs to me how sad it is that back in the day, it used to be that if you wanted to find out about some freaky conspiracy or some super weird fringe belief, you would have to order the Time Life book series, or you'd have to go to the library and find the coolest book with the gnarliest cover. If you want to learn about QAnon and adrenochrome and eating babies and dungeons underneath pizza parlors, you can't even avoid that information. Just living in the world or being on any kind of social media, it's like blasting at you.
Yeah. It's a different world.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a better one.
I would like to see a parody commercial of the old 80s Time Life book series, like Mysteries of the Unexplained, but it's all about adrenochrome and celebrities who've had their left eye replaced and like all those crazy Reddit QAnon conspiracy theories.
They're lizard people. That's one of them.
Yeah.
I see these videos on YouTube where like the camera will glitch and it'll look for a split second like they have little slit lizard eyes. And like people are like, this is proof. Look, he shapeshifted on television. I'm like, what is more likely, that some celebrities shapeshifted on television, Joe Biden shapeshifted on television, or I don't know, a camera didn't work right?
So you're from New Jersey. We had talked about the pig lady on Brian McCauley's episode. Have you ever heard of Portland's Bandage Man at Cannon Beach?
No, I've been to Cannon Beach so many times. What I need to know about the Bandage Man.
Oh, you really do? Okay, this is a public service announcement to warn you. There is a rumor that has haunted the town of Cannon Beach for over 50 years. Back in the 1950s, a logger at one of the mills got totally cut open by one of the saws, and they rushed him to the hospital, but there is a road there along Cannon Beach that is so treacherous that the ambulance crashed, and the patient, who they'd completely wrapped head to toe in bandages, escaped. The rumor after that was that when young lovers would go onto this dangerous stretch of highway to park, to hook up, to drive around on this little speedy loop, they would be attacked by the Bandage Man. He would slam on their hoods or crack their back windows. They would race away, and when they would get home, they'd look in the back seat and they'd find a scrap of bloody bandage.
I'm going to need to hook up at the Oregon coast. This is the only way to verify this.
They widened the highway and they did some things because this was one of the deadliest stretches of road for a long period of time.
Yeah.
It's possible that this rumor was spread to try to keep teenagers from bombing around or pulling over on the corner of this really dangerous curvy road. But the rumors really kind of kicked off during the period of time when Universal was releasing all of the Mummy movies.
That's what he is. I was going to say, he's just the Bandage Man. He's a mummy. He's a mummy.
I mean, he hasn't had his organs removed and stored in canopic jars necessarily, but yes. So that is the Bandage Man at Cannon Beach. Are there any local urban legends, haunts, cryptids from your time in New Jersey or Portland that you're a fan of?
In New Jersey, we had this road by us called Shades of Death Road.
Ooh.
The rumor was the road was haunted. I've been on it. I didn't see a ghost, but they said it got the name Shades of Death because as you're driving, there's a big canopy of trees. The trees kind of stretch over and create almost a tunnel-like effect. It's difficult for the light to get through, even in the middle of the day. And they said all the mobsters used to dump their bodies over there because of how dark it was and how remote it was from from the city and some of the other places where a lot of people live. So that was one of our favorite places to go as high schoolers, to take a ride down Shades of Death Road.
It's awesome.
But I'm going to say this about not necessarily Portland, but the Oregon coast. It is one of the weirdest places I've ever been to. It's just almost liminal. There's like something kind of haunting about it. It's always foggy. It's always kind of wet. There's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of civilization. There's this town called Depot Bay, which is maybe an hour and a half outside of Portland. And we went there one time, and they have a little strip of stores for tourists to go to. So we were just popping in some of the stores, an ice cream shop and taffy and all that crap. And we pop into a little souvenir shop, and we're looking at the little trinkets or whatever. And my girlfriend was buying one, and the guy was ringing us up, and they had a Ouija board above him, like just kind of on display. And we're ringing up, and I go like, "What's the deal with the Ouija board?" And he just looks at it. He goes, "Oh yeah, the whole town's haunted." That's all he said. He didn't offer any explanation. He just said it like it was the most matter-of-fact thing.
Is that their version of the switchboard? You just grab a planchette, you put it on your wall-mounted Ouija board.
Yeah. He's like connecting calls for people.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So what projects are you working on next?
Yeah, I'm writing a book right now about a yuppie couple who wake up one morning with their umbilical cords attached from their garbage disposal to their stomach, and they soon figure out that they can't eat and they're starving to death unless they start feeding this garbage disposal blood.
Makes sense.
It sounds so stupid when I explain it. Look, okay, no, right. They are a insufferable neoliberal couple specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So they are the kind of people that are very performatively good people, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And once they wake up with these umbilical cords attached to their garbage disposal and they realize they have to feed human meat to it in order to keep themselves alive, they have to decide who in their lives deserves to live and who dies, and which of their supposed morals that they uphold are they going to kind of compromise in order to serve themselves. So it's a satire, obviously.
Fantastic. So where can our listeners find you online?
Just any of the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just type Danger Slater. I'm the only asshole calling himself that. So you should be able to find me pretty easily.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black. 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
How would you explain it? A woman in Wisconsin is doing the dishes when suddenly she's possessed by a terrifying feeling. She's positive that her young daughter has just been in an accident. She quickly makes a desperate phone call, only to learn that her feeling was true. How would you explain this?
Birds aren't real. Birds are actually U.S. government-made surveillance drones.
And how do you explain this?
Vaccine syringes inject you with an RFID chip.
Maybe no one can fully explain these things, but they can no longer be ignored. That's why Time Life takes a serious look into this world with a remarkable new series, Mysteries of the Unknown, to provide an objective and comprehensive look at what may lie beyond our ordinary reality. How can you explain this?
Lizard people. The world is run by extraterrestrial lizard people in disguise. These lizard people have taken over banks, Hollywood, and the government.
Send for your first volume on a free trial basis and see if you can explain these things away.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.